Keanu Reeves strolled quietly through the bustling streets of Los Angeles, his plain black jacket blending into the crowd despite his fame. A few steps away, a small boy named Tommy sat shivering on the sidewalk, clutching a tattered sign that read, "Can you give me $1?" Passers-by ignored him, their indifference as cold as the autumn air. But what happened next would ripple through their lives and beyond in ways no one could predict. Before we dive into this heart-wrenching tale, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. If you're hooked on inspiring stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we've got another unforgettable journey waiting for you. Keanu Reeves kept his head low as he walked through the busy streets of Los Angeles, the cool autumn breeze tugging at his plain black jacket. He'd just left a small charity event, one of those quiet gatherings where he could lend a hand without the spotlight. Fame had never sat easy with him. He preferred these moments of solitude, where he could think about the world and his place in it. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, shielding them from the chill, when a faint voice cut through the hum of the city. "Excuse me, can you spare $1?" It was small, hesitant, almost lost in the shuffle of footsteps and car horns. Keanu stopped mid-stride, turning toward the sound. There, huddled against a brick wall on the sidewalk, was a boy, no older than 10. His name was Tommy. His clothes hung off him like rags, patched and thin, barely enough to keep him warm. In his small, dirt-streaked hands, he held a piece of cardboard with shaky writing, "Hungry and alone. Please help." His brown eyes met Keanu's, dull and tired, like the spark of childhood had been snuffed out long ago. For a moment, Keanu just stood there, the world blurring around him. He'd seen people struggling before, too many times, but something about Tommy hit him hard. Maybe it was the way the kid clutched that sign, or how his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. Keanu stepped closer, ignoring the sideways glances from people rushing by, and crouched down to Tommy's level. "Hey, what's your name?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. "Tommy," the boy mumbled, barely audible, his gaze dropping to the cracked pavement. He hugged a crumpled backpack tighter, like it was all he had left in the world. Keanu nodded, letting the silence settle for a second, before pressing gently. "You out here by yourself, Tommy?" The boy's lips trembled, and he gave a small shrug. "My dad, he's gone. And my mom—" His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard. "She left me here. Said she'd come back, but she didn't." The words tumbled out, raw and jagged, and Keanu felt his chest tighten. He sat down right there on the cold sidewalk beside Tommy, not caring who stared. "How long you been out here?" he asked. "A few days, I think," Tommy said, his eyes glistening. "I don't know. I get hungry, and I don't know what to do." Keanu's mind raced. He'd spent years in comfort, shielded from the kind of pain this kid was living through, but now, face to face with Tommy, he couldn't look away. "What happened to your dad?" he asked, sensing there was more to the story. Tommy's fingers gripped the straps of his backpack until his knuckles turned white. "He worked at a factory. There was an accident, something broke, and he didn't make it. They said it wasn't their fault, but it was. They didn't fix things right. And then we had nothing." His voice shook with a mix of anger and grief. "Mom tried, but she started using stuff after that. She'd leave for days, then one time she just didn't come back." Keanu's jaw clenched. A kid like Tommy shouldn't have to carry this. Abandoned by his mother, failed by a company that shrugged off a man's life, ignored by a society too busy to stop. The injustice of it burned in him, sharp and personal. He'd always known the world could be cruel, but seeing it in Tommy's hollow eyes made it real in a way he couldn't ignore. "That's not right," he said quietly, more to himself than to Tom. "You shouldn't have to go through this." Tommy looked up confused. "Why are you talking to me? Nobody else stops." Keanu managed a small, gentle smile. "Because sometimes all it takes is one person to listen. And you deserve better than this, Tommy. Way better." The boy blinked, like he couldn't quite believe it, and Keanu felt a resolve settle in his bones. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a call to do something. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill, pressing it into Tommy's hand. The boy's fingers closed around it, clutching it like a lifeline, but Keanu knew money wasn't enough. He had resources, connections, a voice, and he was going to use them. "I'm not leaving you out here alone," he said firmly. "We're going to figure this out together, okay?" Tommy hesitated, then nodded, a flicker of something, maybe hope, crossing his face. Keanu pulled out his phone, already thinking of who he could call. If you're moved by this moment, he thought to himself, imagining the story reaching others, stick around. If you're touched by Tommy's story, hit that subscribe button to follow his journey, because this is just the beginning of something bigger. Keanu stayed right there on the sidewalk with Tommy, the cold seeping through his jeans as he watched the boy clutch the $20 bill like it was a fragile promise. It wasn't enough. Not even close. Money could buy a meal, maybe a night of warmth, but it wouldn't fix the hole in Tommy's life. Keanu's mind churned with questions. How does a kid end up like this? How does a system let him fall through the crack? He couldn't just walk away. Not now, not ever. "Hang on a sec," he said, pulling out his phone. "I know someone who can help." He dialed Sarah, a friend he'd known for years, a social worker with a heart as big as her experience was deep. She picked up on the second ring. "Keanu? Everything okay?" Her voice was warm but tinged with concern. "I'm with a kid named Tommy," he said, glancing at the boy beside him. "He's been out on the street for days. I need your help to get him somewhere safe." There was a pause, then Sarah's tone shifted to action. "Give me 20 minutes. I'll meet you where you are." While they waited, Keanu kept Tommy talking. "Tell me about your mom," he said gently, sensing there was more beneath the surface. Tommy hesitated, his fingers tracing the frayed edges of his backpack. "Her name's Lisa. She used to be good at stuff, like sewing. She made me a jacket once, with little stars on it. I wore it till it fell apart." His voice softened, a faint smile flickering before it faded. "But after Dad died, she changed. She'd cry all the time, then she started leaving. She'd come back smelling weird, yelling sometimes. Then one day, she just left me here." Keanu's heart sank deeper with every word. He could picture Lisa, a woman who'd once had dreams, maybe a steady hand with a needle and thread, now lost to grief and whatever she'd turned to for escape. "She didn't always leave you though, right?" he asked, trying to pull Tommy back to a brighter memory. The boy nodded slowly. "She used to sing to me at night, dumb little songs she made up, said they'd keep the bad dreams away." His eyes welled up, and he wiped them with his sleeve, embarrassed. "I guess they stopped working." Before Keanu could respond, a gray SUV pulled up to the curb. Sarah stepped out, her short brown hair catching the fading light. She knelt in front of Tommy with a smile that felt like a lifeline. "Hey, Tommy. I'm Sarah. We're going to get you somewhere warm, okay? Somewhere you can rest." Tommy glanced at Keanu, uncertain. "You're coming too, right?" Keanu nodded without hesitation. "I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together." They drove to a shelter a few miles away, a modest building with chipped paint, but a welcoming glow from the windows. Inside, Sarah got Tommy settled with a hot meal, a bowl of soup and a sandwich, simple but steaming. He ate slowly at first, then faster, like he'd forgotten what it felt like to be full. Keanu watched, a knot tightening in his gut. This kid shouldn't have to savor a sandwich like it was a luxury. He pulled Sarah aside. "What's next? He can't just stay here forever." She sighed, her eyes reflecting years of seeing cases like this. "We'll get him into the system. Temporary care, while we figure out family." "But Keanu, you heard him. His mom's out there somewhere, and she's not in good shape." Keanu crossed his arms, his jaw tight. What about his dad's accident? He said the company dodged it. No payout, no nothing. That's why they ended up like this. Sarah nodded grimly. "Happens too often. Big companies cut corners, someone dies and the lawyers bury it, families get left with the mess, or worse, nothing at all. I'll look into it, but don't hold your breath." Keanu's fists clenched. He'd always known the world wasn't fair, but hearing how it had crushed Tommy's family lit a fire in him. "That's not good enough," he said, his voice low but fierce. "This kid's got no one because of it. I'm not letting that be the end of his story." Sarah raised an eyebrow, half smiling. "You're not just dropping off a 20 and calling it a day, are you?" Keanu shook his head. "Not a chance. I've got means, money, people I know. If I don't use it for something like this, what's it for? He looked back at Tommy, who'd finished eating and was staring at the empty bowl like he couldn't believe it was real. He's been invisible too long, that stops now. Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. Okay then. Step 1, we keep him safe. Step 2, we find Lisa. You're in deep now, Reeves. Keanu met her gaze, a quiet determination settling in. Good, that's where I need to be. He turned to Tommy, who looked up with those tired eyes. You're not alone anymore, kid. I promise. And in that moment, Keanu knew this wasn't just about helping Tommy, it was about proving that even one person, rich or not, could stand up for someone the world had forgotten. Keanu couldn't shake Tommy's words from his mind, those fleeting memories of a mother who'd once sung him lullabies, now lost somewhere in the shadows of Los Angeles. He'd promised the boy he wasn't alone, and that meant more than just a warm meal or a temporary bed. It meant finding Lisa, Tommy's mom, and giving him a shot at the family he still ached for. The next morning, Keanu met Sarah outside the shelter, his eyes set with a quiet resolve. We need to find her, he said simply. Tommy deserves that much. Sarah didn't argue. She'd seen enough broken families to know the odds, but she trusted Keanu's heart. I've got a lead, she said, pulling out her phone. A friend at an outreach program spotted a woman matching Lisa's description hanging around a run-down motel on the edge of the city. It's a long shot, but it's something. Keanu nodded. Then let's go, now! The drive to the motel felt endless, each mile heavy with anticipation. When they pulled up, the place looked like it was one storm away from collapsing, peeling paint, cracked windows, the air thick with despair. Sarah pointed to a door on the second floor. Room 12. That's where she's been seen. Keanu took a deep breath, steeling himself, and climbed the rickety stairs with Sarah close behind. He knocked, the sound sharp against the stillness. The door creaked open just enough for a pair of hollow eyes to peer out. Lisa looked older than she should have, her face gaunt, her dark hair tangled and dull. "What do you want?" she rasped, her voice rough with suspicion. Keanu kept his tone steady, gentle. "I'm here about Tommy, your son." Her eyes widened, then narrowed, her hand tightening on the doorframe. "Who are you, some cop? Social worker?" She glanced at Sarah, then back at him. "I don't need your pity." "I'm not here to judge you," Keanu said, stepping closer but keeping his distance respectful. "I'm Keanu. I found Tommy on the street yesterday. He's safe now, fed, warm, but he's been waiting for you. He misses you, Lisa." Her breath hitched, and for a second, something flickered in her expression. Pain, maybe guilt. Then it hardened again. "He's better off without me. I'm a mess. I left him. What kind of mother does that?" Keanu didn't flinch. "One who's hurting," he said softly. "Tommy told me about your husband. How he died, how everything fell apart after that. He said you used to sew him clothes, sing to him. He still loves you, even after all this." Lisa's lip trembled, and she shook her head, tears spilling over. "I can't. I've screwed up too much. I walked away because I couldn't look at him without seeing everything I failed at. He deserves someone better." "You're his mom," Keanu countered, his voice firm but kind. "He doesn't want someone else, he wants you. And I've seen what happens when people give up, nothing changes. But if you fight for him, for yourself, it's not too late." Lisa stared at him, her defenses cracking. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "You don't even know us." Keanu paused, the weight of her question sinking in. "Because I've lost people too," he said, his voice dropping low. "I know what it's like to feel like the world's against you. And I've got a chance to help Tommy not lose you. That's enough for me." His words hung there raw and unguarded, and Lisa's shoulders slumped, like the fight was draining out of her. Sarah stepped forward, her tone practical but warm. "We can get you help, Lisa. There's a rehab program, good people, a real shot at turning things around. Tommy's waiting, but he needs you whole." Lisa wiped her face with a shaky hand, staring at the floor. "I don't know if I can do it," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I've tried before. It didn't stick." "Then try again." Keanu said, leaning in just enough to catch her gaze. Not for me, not for anyone else. For Tommy. For the kid who's still holding onto that jacket you made him. One step at a time. I'll be there. Sarah will too. The room went quiet, the only sound Lisa's uneven breathing. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. For him. Keanu felt a rush of relief, but it was tempered by the reality of what lay ahead. Lisa's eyes were still clouded with doubt, her hands trembling as she let them in. The room was a wreck. Empty bottles, cigarette stubs, a life unraveled. But beneath it, Keanu saw a woman who'd once been more. Society had failed her, just like it had failed Tommy. No safety net, no second chances, just a slow slide into darkness, but now there was a crack of light. Sometimes, he thought. All it takes is someone believing in you to pull you back from the edge. As Sarah made calls to arrange the next steps, Keanu sat with Lisa, listening as she murmured about the life she'd lost. Her tears fell freely now, and he knew this was just the start. Love and faith could spark a fire, but keeping it burning, that was the real fight. Lisa's first week in rehab was a battle. Shaky hands, sleepless nights, and a mind that kept screaming she'd fail again. But Keanu didn't let her face it alone. He showed up every few days, sitting across from her in the center's stark visiting room, his calm presence a quiet anchor. You're doing this for Tommy, he'd remind her when her resolve wavered, and for you. Meanwhile, Tommy stayed at the shelter, safe but restless, his trust in his mom hanging by a thread. Keanu made time for him too, dropping by with a stack of books, adventure stories, comics, anything to spark a light in those tired eyes. One afternoon, Keanu sat with Tommy on a worn couch in the shelter's common room. "What's your favorite thing your mom ever made you?" he asked, flipping through a dog-eared copy of The Hobbit. Tommy thought for a moment, then said, "That jacket with the stars. She sewed it when I was little. Said it'd keep me safe." He paused, his voice dropping. "I lost it a while back. Guess it didn't work." Keanu set the book down, meeting Tommy's gaze. "She's trying to come back to you, kid. It's not easy, but she's fighting. You think you can give her a chance?" Tommy shrugged, uncertain. What if she leaves again? The question hit Keanu like a punch. He'd wondered the same thing about people in his own life who'd slipped away. "Then, we'll figure it out," he said firmly. "But I've seen her eyes when she talks about you. She's not running this time." Tommy didn't reply, but the way he clutched the book tighter told Keanu he was listening. Back at the rehab center, Lisa started opening up. "I used to dream about having my own shop," she told Keanu one day, her voice fragile but alive. "Just a little place, sewing clothes, maybe teaching other moms how to make stuff for their kids. I was good at it, you know." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You still are. That doesn't go away. You could build that dream again." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "Who'd trust me now?" He didn't hesitate. "I would. Tommy would." Weeks passed, and Lisa grew stronger, her hands steadier, her eyes clearer. Keanu saw it, and he knew it was time. He coordinated with Sarah to set up a supervised visit at the center. When the day came, he picked Tommy up from the shelter, the boy fidgeting in the passenger seat. "You nervous?" Keanu asked as they pulled into the parking lot. Tommy nodded, staring out the window. "What if she's mad at me?" Keanu shook his head. "She's not. She's been waiting for this as much as you have." Inside, Lisa stood in a small meeting room, her hands twisting together. She'd put on a clean sweater, one of the few things she owned now, and her hair was pulled back, revealing a face that looked younger, softer than before. Tommy froze in the doorway, gripping Keanu's hand. "It's okay," Keanu whispered, kneeling beside him. "She's here because she loves you. She's been working hard to be the mom you need." Tommy took a shaky breath, then stepped forward. Lisa dropped to her knees as he got close, tears already streaming down her face. "Tommy," she choked out, "I'm so sorry. I love you so much." For a heartbeat, Tommy just stood there, his small frame rigid with years of hurt. Then he lunged forward, throwing his arms around her neck. "I missed you, Mom," he sobbed, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Lisa clutched him like she'd never let go, rocking him gently as her own sobs shook her. "I'll never leave you again," she whispered. "Never." Keanu stepped back, watching from the corner, his throat tight. The room seemed to shrink around that embrace, a mother and son stitching together the pieces of a life torn apart. But even as his heart swelled, a shadow lingered in his mind. How many other Lisas and Tommies were out there, with no one to pull them back together? The system hadn't saved this family. He had, with Sarah's help. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't enough. He clenched his fists, a silent vow forming he'd do more, somehow. Later, Keanu worked quietly with Sarah to rent a small apartment, a clean, simple place with a kitchen and 2 bedrooms. He didn't tell Lisa yet. He wanted it ready when she finished the program. As he handed over the deposit, he thought of Tommy's jacket with the stars, of Lisa's dream of a shop. They deserved a fresh start, and he'd make sure they got it. "This isn't just about them," he told Sarah. "It's about showing what's possible." Back at the center, Lisa held Tommy's hand as they said goodbye for the day, her smile fragile but real. Keanu caught her eye and nodded. A promise kept, and more to come. The story of Tommy and Lisa's heading toward an ending you won't see coming, he thought, picturing the journey ahead. Stick around. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. Lisa stepped out of the rehab center a month later, her shoulders squared, her eyes bright with a determination Keanu hadn't seen before. Tommy waited outside, bouncing on his heels, and when she emerged, he ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Keanu stood back, hands in his pockets, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "Ready to see your new place?" he asked, dangling a set of keys. Lisa's jaw dropped, and Tommy's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" she stammered. Keanu just nodded toward the car. "Come on, you'll see." The apartment wasn't fancy, a modest 2-bedroom unit in a decent part of Los Angeles, but it was theirs. Lisa ran her fingers over the kitchen counter, her voice trembling. "Keanu, this is too much. I can't." He cut her off gently. "You can. It's not a handout. It's a start. You've earned it." Tommy darted from room to room, his laughter echoing, a sound that filled the space with life. For the first time in years, they had a home. Lisa didn't waste the chance. With Keanu's encouragement, she dug out an old sewing machine she'd salvaged from storage, a relic from better days. She started small, mending clothes for neighbors, her hands rediscovering their skill. Word spread, and soon she had a steady trickle of customers. One evening, as Keanu dropped by with a pizza for Tommy, Lisa showed him a sketch, a tiny storefront with a sign reading Lisa's Stitches. "I want to teach other moms," she said, her voice steady. "Single moms, ones like me who need a way out, free lessons so they can stand on their own." Keanu set the pizza box down, struck by her resolve. "You're already doing it," he said, "turning your pain into something good." She smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and he saw the woman she'd once been. The one Tommy remembered. With a small loan from Keanu and donations from a few locals he'd quietly rallied, Lisa's Stitches opened its doors 3 months later. The first class had 5 women, all nervous but eager, their kids playing in the corner as Lisa taught them to thread a needle. She glowed, her purpose reborn. Tommy thrived too. Back in school, he'd traded his silence for curiosity, his grades climbing fast. One day, Keanu found him hunched over a library book about civil rights lawyers. "I want to be one," Tommy said, looking up, "so I can stop companies like the one that killed Dad, make them pay." Keanu's chest tightened, pride mixed with the sting of knowing how rare that chance was for kids like Tommy. "You will," he said, "and I'll be there to cheer you on." But the real surprise came later. Keanu hadn't stopped at the apartment. Late at night, after Tommy and Lisa were settled, he'd been meeting with Sarah and a few trusted friends, people with money, influence, and hearts as big as his. Together, they launched the Starry Threads Fund, named after Tommy's lost jacket. It was a quiet operation, no press, no fanfare, just cash and resources funneled to shelters, rehab programs, and kids on the streets. Keanu wrote the first check himself, a hefty sum he never mentioned to anyone. Months rolled by, and the ripple effect grew. Lisa's shop became a hub. Moms who'd learned from her started their own small gigs, paying her lessons forward. Tommy aced his classes, his teachers raving about his grit. Stories trickled back to Keanu, a teen reunited with his dad, a woman off the streets because of a sewing kit and a bus pass from the fund. One night, Lisa and Tommy invited him over for dinner. Spaghetti, homemade sauce, a meal that tasted like family. "Well, you didn't just save us," Lisa said, her eyes misty. "You gave me back my life." Tommy piped up, shy but earnest. "Thanks, Keanu, for everything." Keanu waved it off, his voice gruff. "You two did the work, I just opened a door." But as he sat there, watching them laugh over a spilled napkin, he felt a deep, unshakable warmth. This wasn't just their story anymore. It was bigger. One act of kindness had sparked a chain, touching lives he'd never even meet. When a local reporter got wind of it months later, cornering Keanu after a rare public event, he kept it simple. "Everyone deserves a shot," he said, shrugging. "I saw a kid who needed one, a mom who'd lost hers." That's it. The reporter pressed, but Keanu slipped away, uninterested in the spotlight. Back home, he pulled out a photo Tommy had sent, a grainy shot of him and Lisa outside her shop, grinning. He tacked it to his fridge, a reminder of the domino effect he'd started. Lisa and Tommy's lives weren't perfect. Money was tight. Old wounds lingered. But they were whole. And beyond them, the fund quietly grew, a testament to what belief and action could do. Keanu walked into the night, the city buzzing around him, knowing one truth. Change starts small, but it doesn't stay that way. One person, one choice, could shift the world. What strikes me most about Keanu, Lisa, and Tommy's story is how it flips the script on who's responsible for change. Some might say it's not one guy's job to fix a broken system, governments, corporations. They're the ones who should step up. Fair point. But I think Keanu shows us something rawer. Waiting for the system often leaves people like Tommy on the curb. Maybe it's on all of us, famous or not, to act when we can, to believe in someone when no one else does. It's messy, imperfect, and not everyone agrees it's enough. What do you think? Does one person's kindness really ripple? Or are we kidding ourselves without bigger fixes? Drop your thoughts below. I'd love to hear. Thanks for watching this journey with me. Subscribe, like, and share if it moved you. Let's keep spreading these stories together.